Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from Totally Not Mark. We're continuing with his Fullmetal Alchemist review. We're on the final part. Can't wait for this. I cannot wait for him to see what's actually been happening the whole time, who certain people are, and the scene with the tank. The scene with the tank. Bradley chasing a tank. Oh my god. Right, this is just going to be absolutely epic. Check out my Etsy shop. Check out my Patreon page. Let's do this.
I don't think a story has made me feel this way before. Behind me, as many of you know, is a bookcase filled with, frankly, far too many manga. Stories that artists and writers have dedicated their lives to telling. They are the result of thousands of hours of blood, sweat, and tears being poured into a passion project, the likes of which neither I nor those who are even long-time fans can truly fully appreciate. When I started to review other series on this channel outside of Dragon Ball, I preemptively purchased a host of other popular series and since then have expanded my collection to include even more. This is all to say that for years, this story, Fullmetal Alchemist, has just been sitting behind me, waiting for me to finally find the time to give
That's mental. He's had it for ages and then it's just like,
it the attention that it deserved. And now, having finally closed the book on the final chapter of this breathtaking series, I find myself now glancing behind me more and more at the stories I've yet to read, thinking just how many of these are hiding masterpieces beneath their covers. But I digress. How do I feel after having finished Fullmetal Alchemist? Did I think Hiromu Arakawa delivered a conclusion worthy of this exceptional and personal story? What did I think of Fullmetal Alchemist? What a question.
what a question. Cool. Cool cover. Let's get it.
I'm going to try my best to cover the final 7 volumes of manga I read this week to bring this series to a close in a satisfying fashion. And trust me, given the amount of material I have to cover this week, make sense of, break down, and give my thoughts on, it'll be a miracle if I do manage to make it to the finish line without missing something someone out there enjoys. This is to say that Fullmetal Alchemist isn't a trite or shallow work of art, but instead one that can be enjoyed by 100 different people in 100 different ways. And that's according to the author herself. So don't shoot the messenger. To tell you the truth, I've spent the last week contemplating how I want to express myself concerning this section of the story, this series, and specifically how it executed those last few chapters and how they made me feel. Oftentimes in these deep dives into a particular author's work, I like to dig into the backstory of the creator in question and see how their lives might have shaped the person they became and ultimately the story they decided to tell and craft.
Yeah, he does do a lot of research. Like, I didn't realize that, like, the author of Fullmetal Alchemist, like, actually interviewed people who are in wars to get, like, a more realistic approach to how the Ishvalan war played out. Not like madness.
In the same way Naruto was inspired by Kishimoto's own life experiences, and Hunter x Hunter at times might have been a reflection of Togashi's inner turmoil at the time, I think Fullmetal Alchemist is a projection of how a farm-loving country girl in northern Japan saw and interpreted the world. The more I read about this woman, the more I realized that she's an artist in the truest sense of the word. A student not just of drawing or traditional means, but of people. She understands people. She's the sort of person to recognize her own conviction and pursue a career writing shonen as a woman, something at the time and even today wasn't and still isn't considered commonplace.
Yeah, it's really not, is it? Yeah, it's like, it's targeted at young men, so it's usually young men, well, not young men, but men that make them, so it is interesting. I've got to be honest, I didn't realize it was a female author until watching these reviews. You know, as soon as it clicked, I was like, wow, but still doesn't bother me. Absolutely boss.
She's someone that wrote her story with a clear understanding that, just like life, everyone who took the time to read this story will likely come away with their own unique impression, and she welcomed that. Much like the people of Jing in her story, she very much seems like the sort of person not to talk in absolutes but to feel the rhythm of the world or the pulse of her own story, allowing her characters to dictate the conclusions without having hardline bullet points she needed to hit. And it's that nuance that I believe takes this series from a great shonen story and elevates it to one of the very best of all time. Without question. The 7 deadly sins of this story have been framed as villains from the very beginning, but in the end, they aren't. In fact, there really isn't any hardline villain or hero in this story beyond that of the struggle between virtue and selfishness. And on the topic of the sins or homunculi themselves, I very much liked how Arikawa has chosen to explore the nuances of them as not only characters but narrative devices themselves. Not pushing the portrayal that they are absolute representations of evil in this world, but that they are a reflection of our humanity ourselves. That there are ways to express these desires in a positive fashion, proving that what makes human beings equal parts special, wonderful, and terrifying is that we all have the power to be evil or good if we so choose. Greed, as she points out, can be analogous to that of hope. Wrath can be channeled not to kill, but to instead incite change, etc. And it's that nuance that's permeated this story that has, in my opinion, elevated it beyond what it could have otherwise been. It's that realism, those dark undertones everyone loves in this story that I feel stand and speak to the themes Arikawa has been trying to implement and express throughout its runtime and page count.
Gluttony and pride versus everyone.
Yes.
Within many other stories, this...
Oh, mate, this is so freaking cool. When they trap him inside the bowl thing and he keeps hitting it and you don't clock on what he's doing. Oh.
Scene might be considered again one of the strongest scenes or fights offered in its production, but in Arikawa's Fullmetal Alchemist, it's just another day at the office. While this is a rather pivotal and intricate combat encounter for our heroes with some genuinely high stakes, it's worth mentioning that even the smaller scale encounters from this story have offered a host of heart and imagination, the likes of which I never expected before picking this series up. Contained within this fight, while there are certainly very obvious badass offerings such as Al being manipulated like a puppet by Pride as a reunification of the two brothers, the nighttime setting offering a host of unique opportunities to use lesser known skills like Ling popping out of Greed to say hi, and of course, the lion dude. And who could forget this? This has to be like the single most edgy and cool design in the entire manga, and you know, I'm here for it. While all of those more obvious aspects are of course there, and I'm certain millions have already spoken about them at length already, I feel drawn to other areas, like Gluttony's last words being that of lust. And looking back on this material now for the purposes of this video, after having finished reading, I'm happy I took that note because it all matches something I noticed much later in the story. That father, okay, I can't keep calling this guy father, that feels way too pretentious, so I noticed that Daddy assembled a family of homunculi. Gluttony's affinity for lust and her relationship with him feels like that of a mother and son. Pride quite obviously is another kid. Wrath is either a father figure or a weird evil uncle. Envy and Greed are clearly teenagers. Heck, Greed's last words allude to him exhibiting teenage angst, and Sloth is the dog?
I mean, yeah.
Okay, I don't know, with that one it kind of falls apart, but I like to think something like this was intentional. As we continue on into volume 22 with this fight, I noticed something that I almost missed when I was reading through it the first time. And that thing was this wonderful touch Arikawa added to Greed's dialogue. You might have noticed that every time Ed refers to one of the two chimeras in his stead, he calls them either Lion Guy or Gorilla Man or something like that. No matter what, he never calls them by their real names, and honestly, at that point in the story, even I, who takes notes, didn't recall their names either. We just didn't think of it as, you know, important. However, and this is gorgeously subtle, Greed, despite being a debaucherous, outspoken blowhard, doesn't call them fake or derogatory names. Every single time he refers to them by their real names.
Wow, okay,
this
interesting.
creative choice, when you focus on it, almost feels like it's out of character for Greed, until you realize that in reality it's pointing out that Greed isn't being entirely authentic with what he truly wants. It's a wonderfully subtle indication of where his true values as a character lie and where his story will ultimately take him. I love this creative choice with a capital L. It's just perfect.
Yeah, because you'd think someone like that, with being called Greed, you just care about yourself. You're not going to bother taking in anyone else's like names or interests or anything like that.
Chef's kiss. Hohenheim and Al's plan is equally amazing. Al is an absolute savage here, using himself as live bait to trap Pride inside the rocks with him. And over the last week, I think I've figured out what makes Al specifically engaging as a character for me. For as long as I can remember, I've been a fan of active characters. Characters like Luffy, Goku, Vegeta, Naruto,
People that
Eren
push the
from Attack on
narrative,
Titan.
yeah.
All natural leader types that take the story by the horns, control the narrative, and create interest for us as readers as a result. They all have wildly different but natural charismas. In other words, it's easy to enjoy those characters because when they are on screen, the story happens.
Yes, that's what
Alphonse
is
Elric
pushing the narrative.
is not an active protagonist, or at the very least, he's not a natural fit for one, I think. Edward so naturally fits this description, however. It's his will alone that has caused this entire mess, and he's even the reason Al is there in the first place the way he is. Time and again, he feverishly pushes, scratches, claws, and crawls towards his ultimate righteous goal. And while Al certainly helps him in whatever way he can, he's always been more inclined to worry about his brother and insist they rest or exercise caution in reaction to something or someone.
Yeah, so he's not actually pushing the narrative himself.
He's a very natural, reactionary character, a very likable one. But why I like him as a character case study so much is because Arikawa has written him to be a reactionary character with a set of morals that forces him outside of his comfort zone to be active. Sort of like a reverse Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan, if you will.
Okay.
Where Eren was as clear an active character as one could imagine, trapped in a world that reminded him time and again that he was powerless. Alphonse is such a soft, caring, gentle, and kind reactionary character, tailor-made for that role, who is also trapped in a world that forces him to consider his actions more closely, forcing him to take the initiative, and it's so damn cool to watch. And the plan they implement here in this section is just outstanding. This is a character that doesn't want anyone to get hurt or die on his behalf again, and he is willing to shred his body apart or separate himself from the group for as long as he's needed to, if it means he's contributing to the goal in a meaningful capacity to save others. He needs no food, no oxygen, so all he has to do is pretty much wait for the day of reckoning to pass now. It's a genius move on his part, I think, and even if it ultimately doesn't work out...
Yeah, because Pride's a clever boy. He's a clever boy. This whole sticking thing.
...his favor with Pride using Morse code to contact Kimberly. What? Whatever. The scene still rules, and now we're headed into the big finale, as Team Mustang, aided by Rebecca, Maria Ross, and Havoc, all make their presence known in their own small ways. I'm thrilled that the moral of this story is not to let your darker nature overshadow the good that you can offer the world. It's of course already been pointed out in this story that in every human being there's the 7 deadly sins, of course, that we all fall prey to under the right and wrong circumstances. And I love that throughout this story there's been a consistent effort to not shy away from each individual exhibiting their own unique blend of either utilizing their sin for good or avoiding the darkness that they might flirt with entirely. We've seen greed used as a synonym for hope in many cases. We later watch as the pride of an entire civilization can be the source of unity in Hohenheim, and we see in the case of Al, slothfulness can also be seen as a willingness to rest and enjoy the moment free of stress. Alphonse has tried to help his brother unwind when he can, and it's wonderful to see. On the other hand, in the case of Havoc, he had every excuse to sit in his butt and just feel sorry for himself. To do so would be slothfulness taking over his life in a counterproductive way, and we see him push past that in this scene, helping the war effort, without which they would have just suddenly lost. This is all to say that this is such a stunningly told story, full of detail, nuance, and it's a joy to read.
There is a lot of detail, but it... I mean, I haven't read the manga and the anime only, but... excuse me. I never felt like it was information overload either. Like, it was just very straightforward, you know. Because, like, for instance, you could bring up the Hunter x Hunter manga example where it's just pages of dialogue. So unnecessary. This gives you all the information that you need, and it works. It's great.
一緒に戦おう
This is Alphonse's defining character moment, or at least the most demanding one he's ever encountered. In the past, I've spoken about how this story has presented Edward and Winry with circumstances that allow them to make a character-defining choice. A choice demonstrating who exactly they are when under extreme pressure. The bigger the antagonist and the easier the shortcut, the better. For Winry, it was deciding not to retaliate against Scar in a violent manner, but to be true to her own healing nature. And for Ed, it was choosing not to take an easy but morally bankrupt road into achieving everything he's ever wanted. And in a completely different fashion to that which Ed found himself in, one of Kimberly's former henchmen, Heinkel, or Lion Man, offers Alphonse the stone, not to manipulate him, but to instead simply survive. Instead of looking at this as a compromise, the Philosopher's Stone is presented as a potential source for good here. It's explained that these people trapped inside were unfairly sacrificed, and now, as Heinkel says, there's a chance to fight the same force that once took everything away from them through Alphonse. Justice. And against all odds, in this desperate situation, Al moves forward and uses the power of the stone for the first and the very last time.
This is so freaking cool, man. I need to watch Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood again. I need to watch it again, man. It's just so... I think I've watched it twice. I'm not one for multiple watches. I think I've mentioned that before, but... Yeah, if I've watched something twice, then you know I love it. So yeah, I need to watch Brotherhood again.
Resulting in one of the most astonishing fight sequences in this story, regardless of whether it's the manga or the anime. And while this courage and determination Alphonse demonstrates here will result in another reckless decision during the climax of this story in chapter 107, it also shows that this enormous power in the right hands can be used to protect and to heal.
Yeah.
And that is exactly how Kimberly, the one who offered Ed that same Philosopher's Stone with evil intentions, is taken out by none other than his former subordinate Heinkel, now healed thanks to the power of that very stone.
でも心配しないで。君は私の中で生き続けるのだから。
And as we continue reading, Mustang's forces aid in the support of the Armstrong agenda, and Hohenheim, Scar, Edward, and Lanfan all rush in to confront Daddy, until a teeny, tiny, small wrench gets thrown into the mix.
Oh yeah. The Zetsus! All the Zetsus!
So yeah, look, these guys are all sorts of scary and unsettling,
Yeah,
particularly
they are.
when you
Creepy as anything, man.
consider their moans of the pleas for help from an entire group of people, young and old. So yeah, it's the stuff of nightmares. However, the implications are both better and much worse than we might consider upon their release in the story.
It's cool, isn't it? Because like, what all the government and that think they know about the plan, and they think it's not going to affect them. But ho 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 ho!
There's a considerable amount of friendly fires here with these little foot soldiers eating up the higher-ups. But most importantly, concerning our main character, Edward, and his co-star, Scar, they're tasked with holding off these undead dolls, but narratively, to tell you the truth, these dolls are really just here to keep our heroes busy, waiting until they're ready to join what is possibly the best scene or conflict in the entire tale. It's easily one of the most cathartic fights I've read through in this story, and honestly, it might be the best part of it, and that might be contentious, but hear me out here. I can appreciate that given how many heart-wrenching and truly inspiring moments there are to come, many have their own impressions that count as the best, but I chose this because I honestly cannot remember the last time a series so perfectly subverted the genre it was housed within, using its own tropes, luring me in as a reader and forced me to learn the same lesson as the central character so effectively and succinctly. I am of course talking about Mustang versus a suddenly freed and re-energized
Envy.
I want to start off by addressing what I think is the weakest part of this entire encounter, and that's the naivety and gullibility this scene hinges on from May. I know, I don't dislike the character, and it's not like it doesn't make sense that she would be manipulated. It just always feels a little less clean of a narrative pull when we rely on a character's incompetence. Even if they are a child, and it does make sense, but if we excuse my disdain for the vertically challenged for just a moment, I want to closely examine what it is about this scene that I think is so damn effective. Once Envy eats all the one-ups in the surrounding area, and Mustang regroups by making the save on Edward and Scar, we finally get this confession once Envy is cornered.
おめでとうマスタング大佐。やっとたどり着いたってわけだ。
So much of what makes this scene work is rooted in character, concerning Mustang and his love for his friend, yes, but additionally our personal bond as readers to both Mustang and indeed the late Hughes, and it relies on our contempt for Envy. So much of the turmoil of this
Revenge!
character Mustang has faced has been due to the coercive and murderous actions of this homunculi, and just like anyone in his position, Mustang erupts with both figurative and literal fire. Mustang pursues Envy like a pyrotechnic Michael Myers. Envy tries to confuse Hawkeye, fails. Tries to prey on Mustang's emotions, fails. I cannot express just how cathartic this felt for me as a reader, for Envy to finally get what they deserve.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'm about to make comparisons to other popular shonen works. By doing so, I'm not trying to suggest that one is better than the other or that Fullmetal Alchemist is objectively superior. What I want to do is establish a trend or expectation set up by prior shonen stories. Because so much of what makes shonen successful predicates on its ability to make us want to overcome that mountain to either gain retribution or, in this case, justice. Goku vs. Frieza establishes a villain that is truly reprehensible in every sense of the word, in the face of a hero that does not want to kill, but to instead best him. The villain pushes the hero past the point of no return when...
Oh god, yeah, Krillin and all that. It's just like a scumbag. It's like, you had it coming. When it comes back, it's like, you had it coming.
And his best friend is killed before his very eyes, after which we as an audience thirst for Frieza's blood just like Goku does. And while the contest ends in Goku showing mercy ultimately, the final takeaway from this is that sometimes there are people that aren't capable of change.
Yeah,
individuals that ultimately lead to their own defeat through the choices they've made. And Dragon Ball is filled with these types of cathartic outbursts by a hero having to overcome and defeat or wipe out some kind of great evil. And look, it's not just Dragon Ball. Naruto has this, Hunter x Hunter has this, One Piece has this, and for good reason. It leverages a tribalistic tendency in each and every human being that reads the material. Of course we want retribution and justice for our lost friends, and the shonen genre has used this trait we all largely possess to grant us a wonderfully cathartic payoff. It creates an expectation Arakawa decided to subvert at the last possible moment.
そこまでです、大佐。あとは私が片付けます。
Like many watching this scene, while I was reading through this, I was thinking, yes, 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 destroy that envious bastard. In my mind,
yeah, get him! And then it's like, no, no. But then it's like, yeah,
I'm thinking they deserve it. They are evil. They've caused so much trouble. And they even killed a character I personally loved in Hughes.
Yeah, everyone loved Hughes. Jesus Christ, it's like one of the most iconic like death scenes ever. Everyone puts that in their top 10.
For all intents and purposes, Mustang in this scene was exacting my revenge unto this character for me. And that's when Arakawa reminds us of the themes she wishes to reinforce in this story. Shonen, yes, but with a healthy dose of reality and realism for good measure. And now we notice that Mustang, while acting as an arbiter of justice, is additionally consumed by lust for revenge and wrath. Edward doesn't want to lose his friend or rival to this darkness, and alongside Scar warns him that there's a line he's about to cross that he'll never be able to come back from. This is a wonderful subversion of how traditional shonen stories play out, and I think its dedication to the themes in favor of this less traditional approach made for me one of the most impactful scenes I've ever read. I just love that in the process of making their way to saving this country and the people inside of it, they are themselves the heroes, overcoming their own deadly sins that, as this story has already pointed out, are inherent to humankind. And watching as his dutiful and resolute subordinate in Hawkeye being the main player in lifting Mustang back from the brink, it's a wonderful contrast to the state she herself was in towards the story's beginning. So in addition to a wonderful subversion, this scene also acts partially as a payoff to 3 character arcs in Mustang, Hawkeye, and even Scar, who thinks to himself and alerts the group to this mistake. Though all of these characters still have more to offer in this department and story, and speaking of philosophy and themes, Hohenheim, who I will henceforth refer to as Ho-Ho, meets with Daddy one more time. They have a big, long talk about ethics and other words I don't quite know how to define, but look, shh, my sweet, it is not yet time to talk about Ho-Ho or his daddy scene.
Here we go. Here we go. Oh my god, yes.
Oh, a tank. That's pretty great. And look, what's that? It's Alex Armstrong and his sister Olivier? That sounds like a boy's name.
That's a girl's name.
And they are facing none other than the brawn of the homunculi faction, the big old tired boy himself. We're talking about Sloth. The fight here is pretty much the 2 Armstrong siblings flexing what makes them great characters.
Yeah.
With Olivier, really hope I'm pronouncing that right, With Olivia, it's her strategy, cool-headedness, and determination.
She
on
does have a
display.
cool head,
With
man.
Alex, it's his compassion and latent ability once he's fully focused. And honestly, I don't know what else to say to you guys other than I just really enjoyed this fight scene. I thought that the way that they struggled against Sloth was compelling, and honestly,
Yeah.
when it came to how Alex rose to the occasion while his sister was injured, it was just icing on this wonderfully constructed action cake. And with that, the Briggs forces along with Armstrong have taken control of Squad A and C in Central. And in addition to that, Izumi helps them finish off Sloth with her husband. Great stuff. And as a quick side, I always found Sloth to be kind of hilarious. Like, he might have the funniest death in the entire series, like, oh no, I can't go on, it's too much effort to live. I mean, that's kind of relatable. And talking about how tiring life is, this dude just gives off the same energy as this girl.
People always ask me where I see myself in 10 years. Like, buddy, I'm just trying to make it to Friday.
And in hindsight,
Wow.
Sloth might have been my favorite after Greed for that very reason. Sloth went too soon. And with him, Envy and a host of others now out of the picture, it seems the forces of good are all successfully congregating in this one location to
Alright.
fight for the greater good. It's a wonderful feeling, but if I know anything for one, I know stories. And this is setting up the hope necessary for us to feel as readers it all be torn
take it
away
away,
suddenly.
rip
And in
up
the
the
process,
carpet.
I'm sure Arakawa will reveal just how powerful and in control the villain is before the big finish or something. I know this is going to happen, based on convention, but I am still, oh, so excited to experience this regardless. The magic of great storytelling. Arakawa, take my money.
Just take all my money. Oh, not this soon, not this soon.
Fullmetal Alchemist.
Come on, give me what I want. Give me what I want. Yes.
に入るのに裏口から入らねばならぬ理由があるのかね
Yes.
This is not the face that I wanted to see now, or so I thought. Little did I know, I definitely knew, but little did I know that this was the setup to get more peak combat for one of the best writers in the industry, Arakawa.
Let's go.
And just like I predicted moments before reading it, this dude takes all the advancements and successes the forces of good have achieved in his absence, and with a few swipes of his sword, he totally wrecks the tank on his own and offers more pressure than the entire Central forces
Yeah.
combined. And on top of all of that, in the middle of fighting Wrath, Buccaneer just gets defeated. Take a big old nap on the floor, my sweet prince.
I didn't hear no bell.
But okay,
Yeah.
look, I've been kidding around, but it's time to get serious because, unironically, I adored reading through this fight
sick.
scene. And why? Because my boy, or should I say, boys here, Greed and Ling, doing their thing. I've said it before, but I'm a sucker for a
This fight where they're okay.
great anti-hero, and in the end, Greed continues to redeem himself as he does battle with Wrath. But
Yes.
Wrath is honestly next level, and that's
Yes.
when Fu enters the chat.
こやつが我が孫娘の腕をちぎり寄った男か
Now look, there's some back and forth here, yes? Does Fu get to exercise some anger towards the man that took his daughter's arm? Yes. Does Greed show some awesomeness? Of course he
Oh,
does.
yeah.
But look, this fight for me peaks at one moment, or should I say, an avalanche of story beats that clutter towards the end. And it all starts when Fu takes a death blow from Wrath. Like, it's getting super serious now. One of the main side characters is now definitely not going to make it, and in response to this, Greed actually loses control of the body that he's possessing, and Ling erupts back into control. And once again, mirroring his last encounter with Wrath, crouches before him, clutching at his loved one to protect them. Again, unlike Bradley,
Oh, yeah.
he's someone that's never going to turn his back on his people. Never. And that's when the unthinkable happened. And really, it shouldn't have been unthinkable. I should have seen it coming. But this is just one of those stories that gets me swept away, and that's really rare for me. For a story to get me to leave analytical mode for a second, or even for a scene, is a testament to how well constructed it truly is. But I digress. Fu knocks out Ling, freeing up Greed to once again take control. Fu pleads with him to harden and to protect his prince as he reveals dynamite hidden beneath the garb that he's wearing as he charges towards Wrath head on. I'm sorry, but can we talk about
Yeah.
how great a scene that is?
So good.
All right, so things are going down. Daddy has his eyes on Ho-Ho. Ed, Mustang, Hawkeye, Scar all arrive at the foot of the man who created Bradley in the first place, this weird, creepy doctor, and all the pieces are now set for the final confrontation to end all confrontations, it seems. And while I will be covering that in just a moment, I want to, before we move on, give credit to the people who helped to make this story and the one that came before so memorable. It's time to dive into the production and the people behind Fullmetal Alchemist 2003 and Brotherhood.
Nice, okay, cool.
The anime adaptations. In part 1 of this review series, I spent time introducing the upper echelon of both the Fullmetal Alchemist animes, touching on the sheer number of high-quality outsourcing studios involved, along with Bones' background in robust mecha animation, leading to both series featuring remarkable model consistency. But of course, it's not buildings that make anime, it's people, and there are some key players that helped elevate both series to insane heights. In 2003's anime, the most exceptional talent on board is a name that has become synonymous with Sakuga, a name that even those only with a passing interest in animation know. It is, of course, Yutaka Nakamura.
Okay. Oh, the blocks. It's the blocky stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
Over the past 2 decades, Yutaka Nakamura has cemented himself as the father of modern action animation. In my Mob Psycho 100 review, I noted that whether you know him by name or not, you've no doubt seen him in shows like My Hero Academia and One Punch Man, and going back further will open you up to his iconic Cowboy Bebop work. Nowadays, you may well have seen scenes you thought were him, but were in fact just inspired by his style.
The blocky
Those
stuff.
pencil impact frames and cubes are so iconic and so copied these days. In 2003's Fullmetal Alchemist anime, he actually joined the production late compared to his peers. At the time, he was busy with an anime called Wolf's Rain, and while his work there was solid, it was nothing compared to what he was about to produce for Fullmetal Alchemist. While these days his work is bombastic and defined by larger-than-life set pieces, his approach back then was much more grounded, with an emphasis on intense choreography over anything else. One of the best examples of this is his scene of Edward versus Greed, a ludicrously well-animated fight that really demonstrates Nakamura's impressive understanding of weighty motion and visceral timing. It vividly extends across the multitude of pivotal scenes this man produced for the series, but it's not just exclusive to action. This man is capable of drawing the most horrifying sequences of morphing entities or fully realized dynamic environments. He's truly an animator with such a multifaceted skill set that it's honestly no surprise to see why he's become such a pillar of the industry after 20 years of refining these skills year by year. Perhaps one of his more interesting feats on this series comes from the show's 4th opening that he directed, boarded, and supervised. While it features a whole host of different animators, the chorus in particular really demonstrates his touch so well. The way the camera dances from character to character is just so fucking good. But of course, Nakamura can't animate every action scene, and thankfully the show wasn't strapped for another star. Norimitsu Suzuki, another terrific animator that, although may not be quite on Nakamura's level at this stage in his career, has since gone on to produce some absolutely ludicrous scenes also. How do you even begin to animate backgrounds in vehicles like that? It's out of this world.
I've not
But
seen the,
that's not to say that Suzuki...
I still need to watch the My Hero Academia movies. I've not watched the first one, man, I guess.
Suzuki wasn't producing some great scenes for this show also. He very much was, but with a very different emphasis than Nakamura's action. Suzuki is a great character animator, by which I mean he's incredible at drawing delicate movements, really bringing to life scenes that aren't action necessarily. And this is no truer than in every ending animation this series has. Yeah, you heard me right. Suzuki solo animated every single ending animation the 2003 series has, and they are so damn good. They really showcase that actually he can do action super well, even if that's not where his emphasis was in the episodes themselves all the time. But I mean, he helped Nakamura during the Greed fight and kicked ass with Ed versus Multiform Envy. So he wasn't exactly totally locked into just endings either. This isn't to say the 2003 anime was carried by only 2 people either, by the way. There are absolutely other great scenes from one-off animators dotted throughout, but Suzuki and Nakamura's work are definitely the 2 I think most fans consciously or otherwise think of when it comes to this series. The show really is a tremendous landmark of its time, and so it's crazy to think that Brotherhood then came along and totally eclipsed its production quality with one of the best looking anime of all time. Where 2003's...
Mate, Brotherhood just looks so goddamn good, man. I love it. Fullmetal Alchemist, brother. Oh, I'm defo gonna have to watch it again. Gonna have to.
Anime had Yutaka Nakamura, Brotherhood had Yoshimichi Kameda, an iconic figure whose work is completely inseparable from the heights of this series. Kameda is certainly no stranger to those of you who have watched my Mob Psycho review. Kameda was the character designer there and really brought the series to life through his trademark brushstroke style. It's an approach that can be found in his incredible One Punch Man animations too, but its birth and usage that made it so defining is all down to Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. It's really no exaggeration to say you could do a 20-minute video on Kameda's Fullmetal Alchemist work alone. It is genuinely breathtaking in every sense of the word. Greed vs. Bradley is a powerhouse of snappy timing and crazy layouts. I mean, look at the way he draws Greed's coat at the start of this, like it's some sort of crazed bat creature.
Yeah.
Or the way he flourishes Bradley's face with awesome brushstrokes. Or even the last cut where he just throws away traditionally painted backgrounds and animates the entire room himself. Like, what a madman. And that's just one scene. Mustang absolutely roasting the ever-loving crap out of Envy has got to be one of the most iconic scenes in anime history. Kameda just lets loose with the most insane fire shapes, topped off with his now iconic brushstrokes drenching the scene with unparalleled energy. I mean, he really just never stops firing on all cylinders across the entire production. Bradley vs. Scar is another one of those scenes of pure unfiltered madness. It's all just so dynamic, and when you look at Arikawa's panels from Mustang vs. Lust, it really just feels like they were drawn with the express purpose of Kameda bringing them to life. For all intents and purposes, Kameda is Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Right.
And you can almost guarantee that all of your favorite moments likely come from him, whether it's episode content or opening and ending contributions. If you see inky brushstrokes, it is more than likely his work. But
it does look so amazing. Ah, damn, it looks so good.
as we know, shows aren't really made by one person alone, and Brotherhood most definitely has another huge player in its lineup. Hironori Tanaka's contributions to this series are beyond comprehension. His output in the industry across the years of 2008 and 2009 have got to be the highest workload to ratio ever seen by an animator. On Brotherhood alone, this man was constantly putting out multi-minute long sequences of absurd quality.
Wow,
When you
I
consider
forgot
most
about
animators
that
are
scene.
putting out 10 to 20 second long scenes per episode, and this man is producing upwards of 3 minutes worth of non-stop movement all by himself, I mean, that kind of speaks to just how insanely talented this guy is, right? His work is defined by a few aspects. Most critically, it's the wispy effect and thin line work. There's something about it that just feels so effortless in spite of its insane complexity. He also likes to draw on ones a lot, which means that every frame within a second is a unique drawing, which leads to a level of fluidity rarely found in anime. He's a real multi-talented animator who not only excels in human action, but draws the most random stuff so well. Like, look at this panda sneezing and then the kids running across the screen. It's all animated so well, and who teaches this? Like, he didn't learn this in school. He can just do this. This is the kind of animator Tanaka is. He gives it his all no matter what's put in front of him. And his presence on this series alongside Kameda is a real key factor in its position as one of the all-time greats. Additionally, Brotherhood was truly blessed with a fantastic array of guest animators too. Ryo Timo, a young web animator, produced one hell of a sequence with Ling, for example. There was also Takashi Kojima, who many will know from One Piece these days, who dropped in for a short but awesome scene. Heck, there's Ken Otsuka, a legendary mecha animator and big Dragon Ball fan, who popped up for another amazing fight. It really cannot be overstated just how stacked Brotherhood's production was.
It's interesting that people that do mecha fights can do like physical like brawls and make them look good as well. It's quite interesting.
Even if you put aside the sheer quality of its storytelling, its music, and its direction, just the quality of its animation alone could have it sit firmly on top of all the best anime lists. Fullmetal Alchemist, whether it's the 2003 adaptation or its latest Brotherhood take, are some of anime's finest productions, and what a thrill it was to learn that a manga I have enjoyed so much was blessed with two impressive feats of anime. It's really no wonder you guys have been yelling at each other about which one's best for over a decade now. They're both so good.
Fullmetal Alchemist.
Do this every time I say it, every time I don't know. It's like, where's the second one? But
So, remember when I
The day of reckoning.
I said that I knew things were going too well and that things were about to go bad again real quick. Well, I didn't realize just how quickly that would happen, and this sudden shift hit me in waves. First of all, it was like, who's that doctor dude? Oh, he did what? Damn, that's bad. Then he sends them away with a transmutation circle, double damn. Then they appear in front of Daddy, triple damn, and Hohenheim is inside of him.
Oh, kinky.
Somebody please
Think of the children.
I think it's important to point out at this juncture why I think this story becomes ultimately as successful as it does. Sticking a landing for a story, no matter its length, is a difficult task.
It
Just so happens that the longer the yarn is spun, or story in this case, the more complicated it ultimately runs the risk of being towards the end. George R.R. Martin, famous for writing the Song of Ice and Fire book series, and of course the series Game of Thrones was based off of, is experiencing that right now. And the TV show suffered immensely as a direct result. The first 5 or so seasons of the TV show were directly based off of the original work, as George had, up until then, written 5 books. And
You see, and this is why I've not watched the final season. I am very happy where I was at. Was it 7 seasons, and then the 8th season was just completely made up? So, yep.
upon the release of the first season of Game of Thrones, he had already been working on the 6th and penultimate edition in this series entitled The Winds of Winter. However, that book has been a work in progress for almost, and I kid you not, 12 years.
Wow,
this is, of course, conjecture, as I'm not spoken to George myself or heard him talk about this struggle in much detail, but it seems to me that he continued to expand his world further and further into the books that have been released beyond what had originally initially been planned for. And this approach is honestly fine, or at least it is in theory. You see, the trouble arises when you establish all of these plot lines and then you inevitably need to orchestrate a way for them to return and meet at a resolution, oftentimes meeting in a singular point. Now, with that said, I hope I'm wrong and that George can indeed finish the 6th and 7th books in a timely fashion, but I'm not going to hold out much hope there. But my point is less about the specific writing process itself and more the nature of stories as a whole. There is a reason that most anime you will come across are usually separated into arcs. Constructing a congruent story with adequate setup, payoff, characters, and themes for even a smaller story like that is immensely difficult. But what Fullmetal Alchemist shoots for is much higher than that. It is a single, continuous story that juggles a dozen handfuls of balls in the air all at once. And with each passing volume I finished, as I progressed through this series, I wondered more and more how she could possibly stick the landing with such a lofty affair. But the fact remains, she did. Arikawa manages to not lose sight of her finish line the whole way through.
Yeah, it's very impressive, isn't it? Like, everything starts to merge together and then it makes sense.
And make sure to deliver those payoffs where she can as best as possible. But maybe what's most remarkable is that while there is clearly a lot of thought put into this series regarding its scene structure, dialogue, and characters, I can't say this story does anything in its ending that is revolutionary. And I love that. She keeps it simple because she already knows she's won us over as fans at this
so
point.
why
There's no
bother
need to
making it
re-engineer the
complicated?
wheel or do something pretentious or subversive at this point because she knows that sometimes sacrifice, lessons being learned, and closure is a great ending in and of itself.
And it's about the journey, not the ending.
And this story deserves that sort of an ending. Like, what happens with Mustang being thrown into a portal of truth against his will to create a sacrifice was a cool idea, but it was hinged on a rather simple concept, demonstrating how Mustang himself had grown ethically as a human being. He wasn't going to throw his humanity away thanks to Hawkeye, or even Al, for instance. Once again, just like Ed was tested at numerous points in the story, Al had the chance to get his body back, but upon realizing he'd be more useful to his brother and friends as he currently is, he has to pass up this once in a multi-year journey opportunity. This entire story is a congregation of simple ideas built on a foundation of compelling and also simple themes that in isolation aren't mind-blowing, but because Arikawa was mindful, she never got confused and was able to paint a very long story tying all of these kinds of narrative tricks together. And now we find ourselves in a very cathartic spot, ready to witness
The Day of Reckoning.
At this point, I'm thinking to myself, this is awesome, but how the hell is there still 2 volumes left to read? Like, this feels like the last scene. But before I give all my focus to the big final fight, I want to say that I love Scar's full circle moment here, where he surprises Wrath and all of us at home by revealing new markings on his opposite arm, allowing him to reconstruct in addition to deconstruct. It's awesome, and while I never learned his name, in the end it really didn't matter because at this point in the story, he's an entirely different person.
Yeah.
But that's just one side of that fight, and with Wrath, Arakawa added a really cute piece of foreshadowing. If you read this page, you'll see a shot of Wrath looking at the sun, commenting on the fact that it's not God, but the hand of man that they must be wary of. And when we cut back to right now, in this scene, we have the hand of man, Scar, seeing to Wrath's end while he looks at the eclipse. It's a really nice touch, and while I love this, it's far from my favorite part.
グリードホムンクルスの矜持を捨てるとは情けない
This is a small detail, but the story would be so much less without it. It's obvious that what Mustang did by denying Pride and the Doctor's wishes to open the portal to bring Hawkeye back was a good, morally sound decision, but what's more is, it seems that because Pride had to force Mustang to open the portal, he, in addition to Mustang losing his eyesight, had something taken from him too. And so, that choice Mustang made still has helped the hero's side despite their current circumstances. It's a lovely metaphor for real life that while doing the right thing might not benefit you initially or directly, there's a net positive outcome that otherwise wouldn't have been there had you taken the other more morally dubious route. And on the back of that, I just love how Edward applies logic to deduce that Pride must too be weakened because of the portal. And in my mind I was thinking, I wonder if Pride is using his regenerative abilities over and over to retain his current self, to not let on. It's a really interesting set of circumstances and a brilliant way to weaken what has been up until now a homunculi that was far too powerful to deal with before.
Very much so, like so freaking OP, and now it's like, okay.
中心はそこかい世界の中心は俺のものだ
Greed is the best character in the series, and I don't want to hear anything about how cool Mustang is or how noble.
Do you know, I can't really argue. He's definitely up there. Greed is definitely up there, man.
And funny Edward is, or how endearing Al is. Greed is the only acceptable answer here. Even though this was a trap ultimately set up by his creator to get him out of the way and to aid his plan, it's far from the last meaningful contribution he's going to make to the story. For this might be my favorite part of the big finish. I alluded earlier to the fact that Greed doesn't talk down to his subordinates and in fact shows them more respect than even the hero of this story does. And as the fight progresses, we see more and more just what sorts of wants he's been denying himself, trying to fill what he believed was a bottomless void of greed, only to discover something far more conventional before he meets his demise. But enough blabbering, I'll get to that later. It's time. After over 100 chapters of mystery and build-up, we finally arrive at the true plan of the homunculi and Daddy. Not just a countrywide philosopher's stone, but harnessing that power to entrap God itself inside Daddy's body. And man, this entire sequence really delivers big on that whole bad things are coming soon business I alluded to earlier. 100 chapters of adventure, character growth, pain and triumph, all in service of stopping whatever this dwarf in a bottle was planning. And then they fail. Daddy knew the inner workings of his pawns too well, to the point of knowing how to get Greed himself in the exact position needed to complete the process. And what follows is nearly an entire chapter of watching on as an entire country is erased from existence. Throughout this entire story, Arakawa has done incredible work in playing with the concept of information. In literature, the idea of the reader knowing more than the characters is very common. It's called dramatic irony, and it's often used to great effect, even within Fullmetal Alchemist. But what Arakawa manages to make use of so very often in this story is, well, almost the exact opposite of dramatic irony. She seems to revel in having events occur that the reader is not expected to understand in the slightest at the time. It's more than foreshadowing, it's outright toying with the reader's knowledge of the events taking place, making them feel completely lost and, in this moment, helpless. This sort of literary concept has been used by Arakawa from the get-go too, even as far back as the initial events of Dr. Marco being ambushed by Lust. Time and time again, we have been thrust into parts of the world that, at the time, we are not informed of in the slightest, and the revelation of these events are left to the forces of time and hindsight. The final sequence of events regarding Daddy's grand plan is the largest culmination of this approach in this story. We watch in horror as this process unfolds, and over the course of a single chapter, dozens of bits of foreshadowing and reverse dramatic irony all come folding in on itself. Suddenly, so much of it now makes sense. The Amestris transmutation circle, the importance of Al abandoning his body, the gathering of the human sacrifices, it all falls in on this singular, unseen objective of absorbing God itself. And what makes this revelation and approach double effective and smart, for me at least, is that it helps to place us in the shoes of the main characters. If you think back, these two characters, Al and Edward, are not just the main characters, there are full-on points of view. What they know, we know, and we understand this world and as much of this world as they seem to know. And while the story being told is one part action, the other part is mystery. And so it was a terrific choice, I think, to have every revelation be as effective for us as it is to the main duo themselves. And as I read in horror while the unthinkable was happening before me, there was one major piece of foreshadowing left to play off. One element in this giant chess game that had gone yet unaccounted for. Hohenheim. His trips around the land of Amestris, which before had served only as moments of titillation around the mystery of this character, come surging to relevance as it is revealed that Ho-Ho himself had been assembling a contingency for
he went places for a reason.
this all along. A contingency that Daddy did not plan for at all. I find it really interesting that the resolution to this doomsday plan comes not only in the form of paying off previous foreshadowing, but chiefly as a medium of ideological positing. The solution to this giant power struggle doesn't come in the form of who is the strongest or even who planned the most thoroughly. It is a fundamental deconstruction of the homunculus plan at its core, that maintaining the sanctity and order of life is far easier than ripping it away. Daddy was so very sure that the 50 million souls in his theoretical battery would more than suffice against Ho-Ho's messy 500,000. But none of that matters, because as Ho-Ho reveals to both Daddy and simultaneously us as readers, the soul and body are intimately connected. Removing that soul by force is considerably more difficult than reuniting them. And in hindsight, we have seen this at play so many times in the story before. Barry the Chopper being drawn to his body, the Chimeras, or even Al being nearly dragged by force to his body in recent chapters. The two entities are drawn together like magnets, and all it took was Ho-Ho's planning and 500,000 ancient souls, the shadow of a solar eclipse, and decades of study to bring the 50 million magnets colliding back together. Man, what an incredible payoff! It is really hard for this entire video to not be just one big Fullmetal Alchemist payoffs compilation, but
But it has to be. It has to be.
but this story really does manage to resolve its threads that satisfyingly. And along that very vein, we finally get to see the true result of Scar and his brother's efforts. And I have to admit, like many of the other reveals that happen in these final chapters, I almost feel stupid in hindsight. Not thinking of using the Continental Transmutation Circle as a base for a Purification Circle feels so obvious now that I think about it. And as Scar opens the theoretical tap, giving the heroes a nearly unlimited supply of power, the real final fight begins. Not just to take down Daddy, but to resolve all of the remaining problems in a way that is ethical. And that's the key. How do you take out Pride without murdering him? How do you take out Daddy without harming others? How do you get Ed and Al's bodies back
together,
without resorting to the tainted Philosopher's Stones? As the entire cast charges at Daddy with nearly unlimited power now,
It's the truth, isn't it? It's when... Yeah, we're getting to it.
it feels like a frantic rush to pop the balloon that is him. Everyone is giving it their all to bring Daddy to his knees. Even Greed, who, hey, he calls him Daddy too. What did I tell you? Greed is just the best. Anyways, this final push to the end of the finish line really is all out. You've got Daddy retreating to the surface to try to acquire more Philosopher's Stone, him setting off a small nuke worth of power just to make a point, the army shooting its entire firepower at Daddy just to hold him off for a second, Ronald McDonald's Mustang showing up with a Hawkeye as his seeing eye hawk. Greed tricking Daddy into leaving an opening by luring him in with his Philosopher's Stone. Edward having his arm completely obliterated. There is just so much that happens in this final sprint that is impossible to cover in full detail without talking for at least 3 more hours, and I'm not willing to do that. But one thing I can say for certain is that the energy and desperation of this sequence shines through completely clear as a viewer and as a reader. With every single rapid-fire turn of events, I felt more and more tense reading through this gigantic affair. And then my heart stopped, because I could see plain as day that Edward had permanently lost use of both of his arms. And I know that when Al starts talking about using equivalent exchange to sacrifice himself for Ed's arm, I know that Arakawa is capable of going through with it. This entire final fight has, at least in part, been about the sacrifices the characters endure to meet their end goal. What is lost and what is gained as a result. Bradley is taken down, but at the cost of beloved characters. Mustang loses his eyes, rendering his incredible power almost entirely useless. And as I read Al's words, I knew in my heart that his sacrifice for this cause would be seen to fruition. And while it indeed did, it certainly wasn't in vain. Ed, now with 2 arms and a deep rage at the seeming loss of his brother, absolutely tears Daddy apart. After several dozen characters helped pull their weight in weakening him, Ed is finally able to pick himself up and take this man apart, and it is so cathartic to read through. We even get an amazing callback to the very first chapter of this story, as Ed once again declares, "Get up, you third-rate fraud. I'll show you there's no comparison between us."
Cool.
Even still, the sacrifices for this battle are not over. As Daddy finally begins to pop, he lunges for Greed in a final attempt to sustain his power. And over the course of the next few pages, a genuinely heart-wrenching conversation takes place between Greed and Ling, one in which Greed is finally able to come to terms with what it is he sought the most from in life. Not wealth, not power, not even God himself, but friends. He abandons Lin, or in reality saves him, and willingly sacrifices himself inside Daddy to further weaken him for the sake of his friends. And I will say it one last time, I love Greed. It is so crazy to me that this seemingly one-note enemy we encountered briefly near the beginning of this story has managed to establish such a strong place in the heart of its viewers. And the funny thing is, looking back, it's not even really that Greed has changed all that much. This isn't a Zuko or Vegeta type situation where the bad guy slowly learns the error of his ways and transforms to a life of brewing tea for orphanages. I mean, the Greed we get in the final volume is really not all that different to the Greed we initially met. If anything, it's more us as viewers that have changed. We were given time to be with this person, become acquainted with their character traits and flaws, their own personal struggles, and watch as they slowly accepted who they were at their core. And with that final act of rebellion, he leaves us with his nearly final words of, "Oh, come on, don't do this to me, man." All that's left is a brittle husk of a dwarf with a newly installed hole in his cold chest. But as Daddy dissipates away, being sucked back into the chambers of God where he came from, the biggest conflict of all still isn't resolved, is it? Al is gone, and Ed still refuses to use the Philosopher's Stone to bring back Al. He even turns down Ho-Ho's offer to be the toll to get Al back. So what solution does Ed come up with in the end? Well, he gives up his portal of truth, his ability to perform alchemy altogether. And that toll might be the hardest possible outcome to accept here. It is the nature of these kinds of stories, the nature of shonen itself, to grow attached to not just the characters, but to their progression of power. We feel a bond to their progress and strength just as they do. We watch as these characters struggle, train, overcome mountains, achieve triumphs, and sacrifice themselves in service of that progress. So to see all of that evaporate away in a single moment, well, I think it might be harder to swallow than Ed dying himself. But similar to Greed at his end, Ed doesn't seem particularly upset with this toll. Despite everything he's been through, it becomes clear that Ed's incredible alchemy skills were never even the point to him. They were just a means to an end, a way to protect his friends as he marched towards his goal of bringing Al back.
Get his brother back.
And that's it. That's the climax of this entire, long, wonderful story.
That's great.
All that remains is some falling action and resolution about the sacrifices that the characters made in this final battle. Mustang accepts the help of the Philosopher's Stone in order to regain his eyesight and help lead the land. Scar is healed and accepts his place in this new world. We even finally get the touching scene of Winry crying tears of joy as she sees Ed and Al whole again. Not a single character is left unresolved or unsatisfied. But in truth, the main point of this falling action that left the largest impact on me is likely the single most incredible page turn of this entire manga. With Ed on the roof of a house, complaining about how he wouldn't even need to climb up here to fix the roof if he'd still had alchemy, we turn the page to reveal an absolutely breathtaking and rare 2-page landscape shot before him. And Ed saying to himself, well, I guess hard work isn't always such a bad thing. I teared up when I read that. It's such a succinct and wonderfully fantastic metaphor for the themes and motifs at the heart of this entire story. This adventure I went on, all 108 chapters of it, each one of them served a purpose. Not a moment of these characters' time was wasted. Every friend they made, hardship they endured, obstacle they overcame, they all served a purpose in helping progress the world in a better direction. And they sure as hell weren't all easy, but that didn't stop Ed or Al. And the message of the story is, it shouldn't stop any of us. This has been a story I've wanted to cover for years. And like I said at the beginning, this has been sitting behind me, patiently waiting to be read all of this time. After all...
Absolutely mad he's had it for ages and then just only now reviewed it. That's crazy.
These years, after reading literally hundreds of volumes of manga, both in my leisure and on this channel, more and more it's becoming difficult to ignore a certain level of pressure and responsibility that comes with covering a story like this, one that touches the hearts and minds of literally millions of people across the world. And for those people, those fans of this story, I never want to leave those people down. And in response to that pressure, my natural instinct is to throw myself more into my work. And with this, I absolutely did that. Across 4 different videos and almost 3 hours worth of material, myself and my team have tried to, as best we can, pour our hearts and souls into this review for all of you out there to enjoy. It almost feels appropriate to call this equivalent exchange. What you get out of this is exactly what we put into it. But I'm also trying to deal with the rather unhealthy relationship I have with my work. I think to myself, maybe if I tirelessly work, people won't be disappointed. That's a feeling I try to ignore in the back of my head during every single video I've ever written. Sometimes I succeed and make something awesome, and sometimes I don't. And, you know, I have to roll with those punches too. And while I still felt that same pressure during this review series, when I turned that page to Ed patching that roof, I surprised myself with my reaction to it. I teared up. I literally teared up. Never has a manga delivered for me something I never knew I needed like that. Yeah. And it's not like I shouldn't have seen this coming. This story is, after all, about perspective at the end of the day. 3 hours of time I've dedicated to dissecting and expressing my thoughts on your favorite story in this, and it's difficult. But man, was this wonderful to read. So, to close things off with this video, I'll leave you with this. It was hard work reviewing this series, but I guess hard work isn't always such a bad thing.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching.
I wonder what's next. Are we going to get hints? Sometimes he puts hints in the endings. I really enjoyed these. These were really good. Oh, come on, give us something. Give us something. Give us something. What is next? Never mind. That was fun. That was cool. Yeah, that was awesome. I really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed these reviews. I always enjoyed Totally Not Mark's reviews. And I found videos that I have not reacted to by Totally Not Mark. They're quite old, but I'm going to check them out. They're Dragon Ball related, though there are 10 worst moments of Dragon Ball Super, and then there are 10 best... No, it's anime. Yeah, 10 worst animated moments within the first 3 sagas, and then the 10 best animated moments for like stuff. So I'm going to check them out in between videos and stuff as well. Try and keep the videos going up. And I'm glad he enjoyed the show. I'm glad he enjoyed well, he obviously enjoyed Dragon Ball. Glad he enjoyed Fullmetal Alchemist. It's such a... I'm gonna have to watch Brothers again. I think that's like 4th time I said this video. But make sure you check out my Etsy shop. I've got t-shirts and hoodies there to be purchased that I've designed. And thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video upload, link in the description to the Patreon page. $1 more for support channel is greatly appreciated. Thank you guys for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe, and leave comments down below. Let me know I should watch this in future videos. I'll see you guys next time.